Uh-huh.
Wake up! Grab brush and put a little makeup. I discussed the way the shake up. Why'd you leave the kids up on the table? Here you go, create another fable. You wanted to. Grab a brush and put a little makeup. You wanted to. I discussed the way the shake up. You wanted to. Why'd you leave the kids up on the table?
Hello everyone and welcome to the part 2 of my Borderlands 3 critique. You guys have been pretty supportive and I appreciate it wholeheartedly. If you missed the first part, I'll be placing a link in the description. It goes over the story portion of Borderlands 3 and delves into that whole mess. So if you're interested, then please check it out. This section, however, will address gameplay, collectibles, side missions, loot changes, and bosses. If you're interested, then please make yourself cozy and stay tuned. To start with the gameplay, we will go from the basics of the game up and slowly move into the loot system changes, action skill changes, and boss fights. In this iteration of the Borderlands franchise, we can now vault by jumping and pressing A, or setting it by default when pressing it forward. We can now also slide by sprinting and holding the crouch button. Ground pounds also will make a return from the pre-sequel. To activate it, we go up in the air a little higher than normal and press the crouch button. The movement feels very natural, and Gearbox have actually added a lot of quality of life changes to the series. From talking with friends and strangers who have enjoyed the game, it seems that the majority say that this is something that they never knew they wanted in the game until it was added. The vaulting and slamming has added a level of verticality to the maps that is fresh, and it is a nice change of pace from Borderlands 2's combat. Being able to climb into vantage points to snipe, or just to slam down, leads to having more options of attack, although opportunities to do so are limited from area to area. Sliding has also opened up more opportunities for combat variety, as some guns greatly benefit from slide shooting. Sliding is also great for mobility downhill and for dodging some attacks, be it from boss or common enemy. We can also now slide kick barrels at enemies, and we have some destructible environments. Sliding can also cause some enemies to stumble, leaving them open to attack. Moving on to the gunplay, it is very excellent. We finally have Borderlands join the modern shooter in terms of how the weapons act and sound. It was stated that Gearbox went into an actual range to record some weapon sounds for this installment, and by God, you can tell. The weapons all sound devastating, like they all pack a punch. The gun manufacturers all have differing models of weapons, but they are all less of a gimmicky mess like they were in the previous entries of the franchise. To run through all the factions quickly, when you score hits with Jacob's weapons, a bullet will ricochet and hit another enemy, which is a great way to differentiate them from other weapons. Having them have such a feature can lead to many mobbing uses for the weapons. It also rewards players for scoring critical hits, and it is an incentive to do so. All weapons now switch between semi and burst, or burst and automatic fire. Aiming down sights does not release a 3-round burst unless you are using the burst fire mode, which is a fantastic improvement. It gives more freedom to the player, and each mode can be used situationally. The player can have a target that's further away and requires more accuracy, so they switch to single fire for a greater chance of hitting their mark. Let's say that another enemy could be rushing the player at the same time as this. The player could switch to full auto and spray that target down, before switching back to single fire to pick the other targets off. Burst fire would then fill this gap, acting as a medium range option. You could tell the team behind this put a lot of thought and applied real-world applications to the dual weapons. Torg weapons can switch between impact and sticky, which again is a great improvement and helps make them more unique. Sticky is a better option for DPS, and normal shells are good for mobbing. It adds another option for players to use. Hyperion guns function the same as in Borderlands 2, but some can generate a shield when aiming down sights. They start off inaccurate, but gain accuracy over time and have reverse recoil in this sense. While the shield thing's interesting, it is extremely situational. Standing in place to shoot a mob of enemies is not a good idea, and while the shield can block some of the incoming fire, it would be a better option to slide to cover. I say situationally good because I recognize that there are some areas without cover, so having a shield on a weapon to eat up some damage could be handy. However, it should not be relied upon and can be a backup plan for most players. Vladoff pistols can switch between full auto and double barrel, which increases fire rate. Have a leech, which sends out an elemental dot, or have zip rockets. Vladoff snipers can switch to a rocket launcher, rocket launchers can switch to mortars, and Vladoff assault rifles can switch to either shotgun or grenade launcher underbarrel attachments. They are extremely diverse and are no longer just the guns that resemble real-life weapons. They each have their own uses and situations. They are also great for mobbing due to the amount of AoE attachments that these weapons can come with. Maliwan weapons can switch between elements, which is handy, but have a startup before firing. This can lighten the load of a player's inventory, as instead of carrying a shock and fire weapon separately, you can now have one gun and switch between them. As the Borderlands franchise has always struggled with giving players backpack and storage space, this is very welcomed. On the downside is the startup time, and while it's not a major problem, it is still a minor detractor. This prevents your shots from immediately ringing out in some situations and can hinder the player. If the player goes down and is bleeding out fast and looking to score a kill, but their gun needs to wind up, it can cost the player a life. Where in this situation, any other brand would immediately shoot, netting the kill. COV guns, not S&S or Bandit anymore, do not reload and instead have a technically unlimited magazine that corresponds to how much ammo that character can carry. An example would be if a player character can hold 124 bullets, then the mag size would be 124. The downside to this is that the longer you hold the trigger, the higher the chance that gun has of overheating, wherein a status effect can be applied to the character and the player character has to cool off the gun. The cooldown takes a few seconds, but is a decent way to balance such a weapon as it acts as a type of reload. It stops the weapons from having a constant DPS and becoming the meta of the game. Next up, TDR guns when thrown now either have homing, become a merv, or grow legs and walk around, although they still have a bad reputation. This change grants more opportunities for the main source of damage to reach its intended target, which is an improvement over just a simple chuck and reload that we've had for the last 8 years. Finally, we have the return of Atlas. All gun types have a version of homing bullets as their ammo switch, however the homing only lasts for a few seconds. During those few seconds of near guaranteed hits, and yes I say near guaranteed because sometimes the bullets will waltz off the path if you're moving at odd angles, is great for DPS and makes the weapon unique in their own way. It seems for the team behind these changes that making weapons more in line with each other was a goal for this installment. Now I cannot claim that as I personally do not know any of them, however I think an argument could be made to back in that statement. Moving on, Gearbox have added a new element to the game, adding to the pre-established shock, fire, corrosion, and cryo. We now have radiation that eats enemy shields and gives them a lingering dot with a small hitbox surrounding them. This causes them to damage their allies if they are grouped together. If you've noticed, they have removed slag guns, which does not make sense story-wise, as slag is melted down iridium, which still grows abundantly on planets across the solar system, so it does not make narrative sense for this not to come back, but that's neither here nor there. Slagged enemies used to take increased damage from all sources, however cryo was intended to replace slag, while cryo only gives 300% melee damage increase in Borderlands 3. Compare that with the pre-sequel, cryo gives bonus 250% melee damage, 200% explosive damage, and 110% critical hit damage. This is a major regression from the former, and why they decided to do this is beyond me. Randy Pitchford, the head of Gearbox, tweeted that radiation would take over as slag's replacement. Instead of dealing double damage like slag did, radiation gains a status effect that indirectly damages other enemies. Now that doesn't sound bad on paper, but you have to remember that it is a strict downgrade from slag in every way, and Randy saying that it was intended to replace slag is kind of misleading. Whether or not radiation was supposed to be similar to slag is something that I doubt we will ever truly find out. Explosion, however, is also now a non-element and instead acts as splash damage. E-techs have also been removed, however any weapon can spawn with an alien barrel, which turns the projectiles into energy-based shots. They also have changed how elements work and have changed it depending on the mode you're in. I will put a picture of a chart on screen rather than me explaining every single change word for word. Simply put, corrosion is barely usable outside of the Jackpot DLC as there are very few armored enemies in the base game. Damage reduction for the wrong element other than fire is also counterintuitive. Borderlands is about using the guns you want to search for better loot, so why are Gearbox now attempting to pigeonhole what weapons we are using? That approach didn't bode well for Bungie when they tried to do so in Destiny 1 and 2, so why would it work for Gearbox? Also, Hyperion pistols, Atlas shotguns, Maliwan rocket launchers, and TDR launchers were removed for non-specific reasons if anyone paid attention to it. I haven't actually thought about that until now, honestly, but with this being the 4th game in the series, a lot of weapon types were omitted. There was a lot of potential for old weapons like Vladov shotguns or Torek snipers to return to the franchise and shake things up a bit. Alas, it seems that this will never happen again. Gearbox has also changed shields and grenade mods. For grenade mods, their effects are no longer locked to the manufacturer. They can all spawn in different ways no matter what, and there are now 20 modules for these grenades to spawn with. The shields have slightly changed and can now spawn with a much bigger variety of parts, and I think that this is an improvement as it makes any shield have the chance of being viable. There are over 30 different modules for shields to spawn that the player can find. Moving on, the artifacts still have passive abilities, but Gearbox has added more to them, such as adding ice to when you slide or shooting out buzzsaws and so on. This makes them have a more impactful use to your build rather than just for passive stats, as they can affect your mobility. This can also lead to more variety and to fill niches in a player's build that are smaller in scale. Class mods now automatically put points into skills even if they are not unlocked, and they can now boost capstone skills. They also do come with passive stats like in Borderlands 2. This is a major improvement, as now simply just putting on the class mod will give you points and skills that you might not have unlocked. This can also help save some skill points. An example would be that maybe you have a skill that has 3 out of 5 points in it. and you come across a class mod that gives it 2 points. You now have 5 out of 5 points, but still have the choice to either put 2 more into that skill or to use the 2 on another skill. This is a great way to improve player choice. Now, another mechanic that has been added is the chance for gear to be anointed, which means they can come with extra bonuses or effects. A quick list for all shields and class mod anointments are going to be in a link in the description, because saying all of them will drive me insane as there are about 70 separate anointments. For now, just know that these are the changes to the loot system specifically. Speaking of skill trees, Gearbox have made a slight change to how they work. There are now 3 different base skills regarding the skill trees that function differently. After unlocking a number of skills, there are also augments that can be equipped that give the action skills different properties. I will be glossing over this as many Borderlands YouTubers have in-depth guides for character builds. Let's start with Zane. Zane has a barrier which he can drop on the ground or keep on his arm that helps protect the player and can give upgrades which give bonuses. We have his drone Sentinel, who with upgrades can occasionally drop a grenade. This tree is his kill skill tree, which is the most popular of his builds. Lastly, we have the Digiclone, who with upgrades can hold a copy of Zane's guns. Zane's unique ability is that he can have 2 action skills in place of his grenade. As of the November patch, Zane is now viable in Mayhem 4, as Gearbox have made it so that way all of his kill skills do ×2. He no longer struggles as much as he used to. Although he is still the worst of the 4 characters, it is very nice to see that Gearbox are caring about him again. Next is Mose, whose action skills add whatever weapons chosen to Iron Bear. First up, we have the minigun tree, which can be used for an infinite ammo build. We have the railgun tree, which works in tandem with the minigun tree for an incendiary build. Lastly, we have the grenade launcher tree, which was used for infinite grenades before it was nerfed, but serves as a quick way to get grenades back. Mose overall is a very well built character. She is very strong and her infinite ammo build is an eye magnet for veteran and new players alike. Personally, I think she's the most fun to play, which makes me sad that I chose to max her last. After Mose, we have the Beastmaster Flak. Now Flak has 3 differing action skills along with his choice of 3 different pets, the choice being between a Skag, Jabber, and Spider Ant. We have Fade Away, which acts like Zero's Deception, except Flak gets 4 shots before he uncloaks. We then have Gamma Burst, which acts as a teleporter for pets and is popular for a radiation build. And finally we have Rack Attack, where Flak sends out Rack to deal damage. This build is popular for critical hits. For our last character, we have Amara the Siren, who's the best character in the game for DPS and bossing. First up, we have Phase Grasp, which acts like Maya's Phase Lock. This build is popular for bossing and elemental DPS. Next we have Phase Slam, where Amara will jump and slam down, dealing AoE damage. This is her melee build, which is strong as well. Lastly is Phase Cast, where Amara sends out a projection of herself dealing damage. This is another damage overall weapons build tree. Having more options for your skill trees is a good change for the series. This opens up more variety for builds, especially with the augments that have been added. This can also spawn new class mods to further influence builds, and Gearbox have been adding new class mods since Mayhem 4 that have been slowly giving us a new variety of ways to play our characters. You have mobbing and bossing builds, speed builds, specific weapons builds, infinite ammo builds, grenade builds, and so many more options to pick from. In this, Gearbox excelled, and I hope that in their new IP Godfall we see something similar to this. Moving on from the skill trees, let's talk about all the boss fights in the game, the loot they can drop, and how they are designed. So for this part in particular, I'm going to be talking about all the main story boss fights. The mini-bosses, I will be addressing in an entirely separate video, so stay tuned if you want to see that. So let's start with Shiv. Shiv is pretty much our introduction to how Gearbox have changed Badass Psychos, which a lot of Shiv's attacks derive from. He has a ground slam attack, a spin attack, and he can now throw axes. Shiv's arena is also set up to where you can kick barrels at him and shoot generators to damage him, introducing us to the new environmental changes. Through farming, Shiv will always drop a white shotgun, being that of Jacobs or Hyperion, which works well for a decent starting weapon. Shiv does not drop a legendary, and it doesn't seem like there's a chance for him to. By the way, all the bosses farmed minus Shiv will be farmed 50 times over on normal mode and Mayhem 0. Other than that, there's not much to say about Shiv. Next up is Mouthpiece. Mouthpiece has a few attacks, and he has immune phases, which we will see throughout many bosses in the game. Mouthpiece will shoot the player, kick the player, shield bash the player, and use the speakers in his arena to hurt the player. He will drop his guard when he does this periodically. There's a pad in the middle with junk in the 4 corners of it. This pad is a speaker as well and can hurt the player, but it makes the player feel boxed in. It is very well made for being early on in the game. Mouthpiece's weak spot is his head, where if shot he will drop his guard. Tinks will also spawn in the arena that you can use to get up if you go down. Personally, for me, I found Shiv and Mouthpiece were very easy. They are bosses that are designed for new players, which is a good way to introduce boss fights. Now on to the loot. After 50 farming runs, it can be assessed that Mouthpiece drops purples around a fourth of the time, considering we got 14 out of 50. For legendaries, we got 8 legendaries out of 50 runs, which isn't bad at all. Out of those 8, we got 5 Mind Killer shotguns. All legendaries I will cover in separate follow-up videos and go highly in depth with them. This gun is alright, depending on your preference, it may be worth the grab. It has charge time and shoots at a high damage sound wave. All in all, Mouthpiece is perfect for what he needs to be. Next up is Gigamind, the second boss in the game who is a brain in the jar. His attacks consist of him throwing nanobots at you, kicks with his hoverboard, and he will summon Maliwan forces. After you break his shield, he will jump on the platforms in his arena, summon a shield that can be shot through, and he will shoot lasers at you. The shield can be broken, and it will open him up to being shot. As he approaches low health, he will summon a tornado and throw projectiles at the player. He will also shift his nanobots in different ways to attack the player as well. His arena is symmetrical with some pipes to hide behind for cover. There's also a red chest on the left hand side of it. So now it's time to get down to the loot, and after 50 runs, we got 8 legendaries, 2 being the Smart Gun. The Smart Gun is a TDR, and when thrown will shoot out a brain drone. This weapon is decent, but isn't exactly worth the farm, as it's alright at best. I think having the Skexel from Scrack and the Ascension Bluff is definitely a better option than the 2 listed above, as it is extremely powerful, and we'll cover all that in another video. Next up is Captain Tromp, who is a tankier badass paratrooper with slightly more interesting attacks. We'll start off with the design of his arena. His arena consists of 2 main areas and 3 lanes, as we'll call them. The middle lane is the larger area, which is pretty much a straight lane with 2 blocks to use for cover on the bottom left hand side. There are also 4 ammo crates on the left hand side and 2 on the right. Now the right and left lanes of the arena are nearly symmetrical, with a handful of lockers on each side and 1 ammo crate each. These both provide cover for the player, but can also lead to the player being in a more confined area of the lanes and being hit with an AoE, so exercise caution on lower levels while doing this. That's all I have to say for Tront's arena. Now onto his attacks. He can put up an ice wall that he can shatter and send shards of flying ice at you, as well as jump at you. Upon approaching him, he will use flame and ice throwers. He will also kick the player and bat them away. Tront's long-range attacks consist of him shooting an ice fireball that travels around the arena. He can launch multiple fire pellets from far ranges. He can also conjure an ice ball that will float in the sky, and if it is not shot down, it will leave a cryo AoE on the floor until the icicles on the edges of it are destroyed. Tron will also shoot out a fire projectile that will leave an AoE on the floor surrounding the player. That's all for Tront's attacks, but also worth noting is that periodically, riot troopers and assault troopers will come out of the arena as well. Out of Tront's drops, we received 6 legendaries out of 50 runs, with only 2 being Nighthawkins. On Mayhem 4, he can now drop Tankman's Shield, which is a new Hyperion sniper rifle that adds bonus damage to its next magazine. The Nighthawkin is an amazing weapon that is definitely worth farming for, as it switches between fire and cryo depending on the time of day. It is viable for all characters and will carry most players through to level 20 without many problems. After we conclude our business on Athenas, we head up to the Skywall to fight the magical Roomba Katagawa Ball. Katagawa Ball's arena is split into 2 different areas, which I will call Low Ground and the High Ground. The Low Ground offers a lot of cover and places to hide from our Roomba friend, and it also has a lot more ammo crates and lockers with 2 sets of stairs to access the High Ground. The High Ground is more open and offers less. It also has some ammo crates. This area is good for you if you have to run and keep your distance from you and the boss. There are also 2 doors up and on the bottom that ads can spawn through. Katagawa Ball has 3 phases he goes through with chunks of his health are taken off. Katagawa Ball has 3 phases he goes through when chunks of his health are taken off. He starts off with his armor phase, where he can shoot a blast of radiation and shoot fireball AoEs. His most powerful attack in fire is his missile barrage. He will stop in place and open his sides to send out heavily damaging missiles. After taking off his armor, he will switch to shock, where he can send out streams of electricity as he spins around in place. He will also shoot out corrosive, radiation, shock, and fire AoE balls, as well as retaining his radiation blast. He will also stop the spin and shoot out radiation spikes, much like his electricity attack. After lowering his health further, he will start to emit an electric field. He will also do a spin attack and shoot out 3 to 5 kinds of AoE attacks at once. He also gains a cryo AoE ball. That is all of his attacks. Now onto the loot. We got 5 legendaries over 50 runs and received 2 tsunamis. This is a returning weapon from Borderlands 1 that used to shoot both shock and corrosive damage. It now shoots all elements minus explosive and is now a slightly above average weapon. This is one that you can optionally farm for if you want to replace your current weapon. Katagawa Ball is also great for farming purples early game and will help you prepare for Katagawa himself. Katagawa's arena consists of 1 large area with slight height differences. It's a square arena with some ammo crates and few places to hide. There are also generators scattered around that can damage Katagawa and his clones. There are 3 radio towers in the arena. Now Katagawa himself creates 3 clones, 2 or 3 jump to those towers while one or himself chase the player. The fight is pretty much a guessing game, and the real Katagawa will send an attack that can blind the players while the ones in the tower snipe. One will get close to the player and will slash them with a katana. There's also a chance that another of the 3 clones can also be on the ground using an automatic weapon. This pattern will reset every time a damage phase is completed. While his shield is charging, he can jump between towers and throw shock grenades and shoot shock spikes. Upon getting to low health, Katagawa will teleport around attacking the player with his sword. He will spawn more clones and if he is not killed quickly. Looking at his loot pool, we received 18 legendaries, with 9 of them being storms. This is our highest legendary count so far. He also drops many purples, making him a great mid-game farm. The storm is a decent weapon that returns from Borderlands 2. It performs the same function, making 4 orbs that shock nearby enemies. Is it worth farming for? Depends on your build, but it's average at best. So the choice is yours. Finally, on Promethea we have the Rampager, whose arena is very similar to Tron's and Katagawa's in design. It is one area with slight elevations, and it is 3-laned like Tron's arena, while this time having elevated pedestals in the corner of the arena that the Rampager can jump to, similar to Katagawa. The middle area has 2 fallen pieces of the room that the player can hide behind. The 2 side lanes offer no cover and are used for mobility. Rampager himself has a 3-phase structure similar to Katagawa Ball, except he goes through 3 different elements. He starts off with radiation. In close quarters he will rush the player and Donkey Kong down B while shooting out wisps of radiation. He will also smack the player, leaving them with a dot. Rampager can slam the arena floor and drop rocks from the ceiling, as well as split 3 radiation balls at the player from range. Shooting him enough will weaken him and leave him open to a true damage phase where he will not retaliate. After chunking his health, he will become immune, glow blue, and summon wisps, which the player can shoot as he transforms. After transforming, he becomes corrosive and some of his attacks change. He also knocks down a pillar in the arena and shoots a 4-ball corrosive blast at the player. The Rampager will swipe in the air and can send a few projectiles of corrosion as well. Instead of slamming the floor, Rampager will now open his chest and shoot corrosive balls at the player while shooting a beam up to the ceiling, causing rocks to fall. Corrosive Rampager prefers to stick to keeping some level of distance between itself and the player, unlike the previous iteration. Throughout the fight, Guardians will also spawn into the arena. After taking out that phase, we move on to the third and final phase, which is Fire. Rampager will jump towards the vault entrance, then go up to the pedestal, firing many fire wisps at the player and dropping them under him as well. He will also destroy more columns as he did earlier. When Rampager slam jumps and hits the floor, it will cause rocks to fall and he will send out more fire wisps in a ring around him. He can also use the same chest opening attack like the corrosive version of himself. He will also mostly keep distance from himself and the player character. This is the perfect boss fight for introducing vault monsters, as it uses its knowledge gained previously from other encounters and applies it to this fight. In a way, it is a test to see if the player has been paying attention up to here, and this is the most generally accepted first difficult boss in the game. It is a very well put together and designed area and boss, and in Rampager's later stages it eliminates many defensive options players can take, forcing you for the most part to make a change of plan. However, in turn, the offensive nature of Rampager's first form will make being purely offensive a no-go, making the more offensive players turn to a more defensive strategy. When rocks from the ceiling start to fall, it elicits the feeling of a lack of safety, making the fight much more stressful than other bosses. He feels like a mini-raid boss. He feels unique. Even though on paper other parts of his fight were used to form a small sense of familiarity within the player, that being subconscious or not. It is smart design, but that's not to say that Tron or Mouthpiece doesn't make players switch styles either. It's just that the amount of thought and care, as well as the fact that the Rampager fight does a seemingly better job with these concepts, that can prove to me to be enough to outweigh the former. An argument can be made either way. Subjectively, I believe Rampager to be the best designed boss thus far, and objectively I think there's enough evidence to make a case to back up the claim. The design team at Gearbox did such a great job with this, and I hope that in the future they continue to put this much effort into boss fights. Moving on, Rampager dropped us a whopping 25 legendaries. He can drop the Quatomizer, a weapon that drops fairly often, as well as a new drop added as of November 21st, which is the Duck Pistol, and in Mayhem 4, he drops a new dull assault rifle called the Good Juju, which gives back all ammo in the magazine upon a kill. I've gotten 9 ducks from him over the course of those 50 runs, meaning that this is no coincidence and that this is a confirmed drop. The Quatomizer is a decent rocket launcher that when fired will switch between fire, corrosion, and radiation damage. It is good on some Moes and flak builds, but I personally have not used it much. If you're looking for an alright mid-game launcher, then this is for you. Now, the Duck Pistol is an amazing Jacob's weapon that shoots out sticky bullets that explode much like a Torgue weapon. This gun is one of the best in the game and will synergize with almost every build. It is definitely worth the farm, and it is great that Gearbox have given us a reason to come back to kill Rampager. The Duck will carry you easily from around level 18 to 25 without too many issues, and is also an amazing endgame weapon and personally one of my favorites. After what I would argue was the peak for boss design in the game thus far, we now get the worst. Next up is the Warden on 8 and 6. The arena is pretty much a circle with slight elevation differences, and there are also barriers and blocks that the player can hide behind with some ammo crates sprinkled around. Now the Warden's unique ability is that he has phases similar to Rampager. During his first normal phase, he will shoot at the player and summon unique enemy variants. Warden can also shoot a rocket payload instead of bullets. When the player gets close, Warden will slam down or bat them away. After the first phase, Warden will go immune and tease a transformation before going back to normal. He gets slightly bigger and he now gains an attack where he shoots electric balls out around him. He will also jump at the player. After phase 2, he will go immune again, get bigger and tease a transformation before going back to normal. His attacks do not change, nor does he get any more attacks. The only change is that now his melees get more knockback. After this phase, he will go immune for the third time and go to phase 4, where he finally becomes a Goliath. He will now slam down on the player, soundwave clap at the player, and shoot 2 big rockets that will track the player to a degree. They also leave a fire AoE upon hitting the player. He can also slam, and much like Shib, will send a wave of ground at the player. Warden will also throw tires at some ranges. Now, what makes Warden insufferable beyond 4 immune points is that if you drop him to low health and cannot kill him within the time limit, he will level up and get all of his health back and do more damage. This can happen up to 5 times, making him a godly Warden. He also gains no new attacks or variations. This is the second worst fight in the game, and here's why. The arena is bland, and we have seen this format recycled 3 times, and while yes, it is similar to Rampager, it is not of the same quality. There are 4 immune stages with barely any difference that Warden will go into before fully becoming enraged. And while it's nice to remind players of old mechanics, it's also nice to try and deviate from them. Prometheus is the first planet we get to visit and explore, and we also get to meet our first vault monster. It is a good challenge for newer players and veterans on their first playthrough. While here, it is insulting, as we should be beyond the point of these mechanics by now. We're on the 3rd planet and about halfway through the game, and now we have artificial difficulty on top of all that, with Warden being a glorified DPS check. This does not make players use their brain, nor does it make them feel accomplished when beating him. It makes them frustrated at the fact they are punished if they do not have good weapons. Does this also apply to other bosses? It can, but why it's such a big deal here is that most people will not hold on to purple weapons of a lower level, nor do they want to sit there and farm for hours to try and get another weapon. While I recommend farming, I understand and respect that people do not have the time or sometimes the want to do that, and the game should respect it as well. It is an infamous encounter that not many players will remember fondly, and not for good reasons either. An example of a good infamous boss fight would be the dragons from Borderlands 2. The dragons were notoriously one of, if not the hardest boss fight in the game. Using strategy and skill, players could plan out their attack and make an order for which they drop down. One of the dragons, Helianth, like the name suggests, heals the other dragons. Another dragon boost levels up the other dragons. By moving those 2 mechanics to different enemies and having an option for what order the players can deal with them in, it circumvents having artificial difficulty. It circumvents ending up with a fight like Warden, where a lack of DPS can completely undo everything you've just done, up to 5 times as well, making it much harder for you to kill something that you already struggled with. The only strategy for Warden is to burst him down and use a heavy hitting weapon or your action skill to deal the final blow before he levels up and gains his health back. This is why Warden is massively flawed and a terrible start to the boss fights on 8 and 6. To continue, Warden drops 16 legendaries, 1 being his signature Freeman launcher and 5 being Wagon Wheels. Wagon Wheel seems to be his new drop given by Gearbox as of the November patch. To start, the Freeman is an Atlas launcher that the player can use like the Straw in Battlefield 4, meaning that whenever the player aims, the missile will follow. It has a high amount of damage and is very good. The Wagon Wheel is pretty much a shotgun pistol where the bullets ricochet off to hit another enemy. Though it is inferior to the Duck, it is still a good weapon. Both weapons are possibly worth the farm, but for lower level players, I would not suggest trying to farm Warden if you struggle to kill him. After that, we have Billy. Billy's arena is a theater. There's no real boss arena for him, he's just kind of slapped into this area where there are many places to be stuck leading to deaths that seem cheap. It is elevated going down, while the player can also run to the right after entering the theater and run up the stairs, and we'll come back to that in a second. Billy has 5 attacks, can send shockwaves through walls and objects, and can teleport through said walls to chase the player. If you're on the floor of the stage, even if you run out of the theater, Billy will follow you and shoot wave blasts at you. You will be hunted down by something that you cannot run from. Yet with that said, you can actually run and go up the stairs where Billy can't teleport to you, and you get to cheese him. Great balls design. But if you didn't know that, you would have a hell of a hard time surviving the fight at level. This is artificially difficult, wall hacking is not fair at any capacity, and if you wanted the boss fight, why did you not make a proper arena where you can't cheese him? This is not good design, this is effortless and cheap. When I say that it is good design that the Rampager can make a player feel like there are no safe options, that does not mean that it is unfair. Wall hacking and blasts that at some angles are impossible to dodge are not on equal grounds with rocks falling from the ceiling that you can run around in the void, even if it seems difficult for some players. These two things are not the same, and I'm not saying this to suggest that you, the viewer, cannot extrapolate that. I am saying it as it is absurd that a game design company cannot see how a boss fight like this should not end up in their games. So far, we have had 2 Goliath bosses on a new planet, and it does not bode well for its reputation, as most of the player base unanimously agrees that Eden 6 is the worst planet. Loot-wise, Billy has dropped 16 legendaries, 13 of which being the lead sprinkler. It's an okay weapon, just a fully automatic Jacob's rifle that when a bullet hits an enemy, it splits off into 1 or 3 grenades that can also damage the player. Moving on from the Goliath nightmares, we have Genevieve. Genevieve's arena is one large rectangular area with almost no cover at the front and 0 cover at the back. There's not much to say other than that. Genevieve's attacks consist of sending out death spheres, skating around and sending out corrosive mines, and has only one melee attack, which is to bat away the player. Although she barely uses it, usually opting to skate backwards instead. She also can use a chest blast and shoot corrosive bullets at the player. Genevieve has 2 phases, the second phase coming after you break her shield. After that, Jen enters her second phase and summons little reapers after the player. Genevieve will also skate around creating walls that the player can either shoot through or run through. That is all of Genevieve's attacks. There are 5 of them, that's all. And while the wall thing's interesting, it's not enough of a difference from the other boss fights. It is formulaic and ineffective, and it should have been saved for the early game only. But instead of establishing another formula for the other bosses or planets, this is it. This is the only one we have. And Genevieve's also just another Maliwan Arbalist with a similar attack count that is scaled up in size. This is pitiful for main story bosses. 3 of the 4 on Eden 6 are nothing but disgraces to boss design. 1 artificially difficult and built to be a DPS check, another one who is artificially difficult and unfair for uninformed players, and the last of this nightmarish trifecta, flat out boring and uninspired. It is pitiful that this is what we have to work with. That the same people who gave us the Warrior, who gave us Veracitus, Bunker, Bloodwing, and Wilhelm gave us this. Even if some of those bosses listed are not on the level of the dragons, they are at least very inspired, unique, and fair. This is a very important difference when comparing the two. In the areas where Borderlands 2's bosses were not the most complicated to fight, they were at least full of character, creativity, unique, and gave the player a fair chance, and each had a genuine reason to be there outside of being a required boss. I want you to think back to Borderlands 2, and I want you to give me an example for a main story boss that you think logically shouldn't be there. If you're still watching this video, I would love to hear your response in the comments section down below. When Borderlands 3's gameplay first came out, I and many others had assumed that Gearbox was changing how bosses worked and were trying to make them more difficult, requiring more brainpower and/or strategy to fight them. What we got was not that, but a veil of bosses that were pitiful to say the least. What is also pitiful is giving the piece of a vault key to Archimedes, who is not even considered a boss by many, apparently not even considered by the game as he doesn't ever respawn. This is extremely sad and something that I have not noticed until recently, mostly because Archimedes and the Rogues are but a footnote in this train wreck of a story. I don't understand why Gearbox decided to make this character, give him a name if there was no point behind him. It's not like they just cloned an anointed tank or anything. So let's see. DPS check, wall hacks, reused asset, and another reused asset. This is extremely lazy design and should not be passable. Now it's not the first time Gearbox has done this, like with Badmaw being a renamed badass torturer nomad with a slight reskin, but at the very least, he is memorable and comes before a memorable area. He has a reason to be there. Archimedes will not be remembered, not by many anyways. In fact, I'm sure half of you watching this either forgot about him or didn't care about him in the first place. Next we have the first original boss on Eden 6, which is Aurelia. Aurelia's arena is a scaled down version of the Rampagers in the sense that it is a rectangle and symmetrical. Again, not much to say here. To get to Aurelia's attack, she starts off by creating cryo barriers that players can take cover behind. She will also shoot out cryo spikes while shooting at you. Aurelia will perform a cryo slam and ice spikes will come out of the floor to hurt the player in the form of an AoE. Upon approaching Aurelia, she will shoot ice spikes straight at you as well as slam down and create ice spikes out of the floor. She likes ice spikes a lot. Upon breaking Aurelia's shield, she will create cryo tornadoes that do a lot of damage and slow down the player. One sit in each lane, which is honestly a nice change of pace, blocking off mobility and making the player feel more confined in a fair way. Upon damaging her enough, she will shield herself in ice and regain her shield, though if you shoot through the ice, it will knock her out of it. Aurelia can also summon a giant snowball, break it, and send cryo damage across the arena. Upon Aurelia reaching under half health, she will summon a third cryo-nado to follow the player. She also summons hailstorms. Aurelia can also throw snowballs at the player. No, I'm not kidding, though that seems to happen only on low health. Aurelia's fight at the very least adds some new attacks, and she adds some challenge while making the player think, even if it's only slightly. After 3.5 boss fights on Eden 6, it's nice to finally have one that is worthy of calling a boss. The Rich Bitch dropped 25 legendaries, 10 being her shield, the Frozen Heart. The Frozen Heart is decent and can be utilized for a Zane cryo build, so if you want a decent Zane build, then farm to your heart's content. Other than that, Aurelia is a decent farm for legendaries and a great way to prepare for Grave Ward. Grave Ward's arena is extremely unique as it's not an enclosed space in the traditional sense. It is on the side of a cliff, and because of that, there are many ways to fall off. There are also 2 massive holes in the platform that the player can fall in, and on that note, we're on to Grave Ward's attacks. Grave Ward has 2 stages and will always start by flipping the arena on its side, sliding the player and trying to make them go out of bounds. Grave Ward will also throw toxic balls on stage. They throw the player up in the air, and it applies a heavily damaging corrosive dot. Grave Ward has a slam attack where he will take his left arm, which can be easily damaged as it is a weak spot, and upon slamming it down, it will send out balls of radiation and will put an AoE on that part of the stage. He can also swipe left doing massive damage and apply an AoE. Grave Ward will also slash the player with his right arm, which can be dodged, but does massive damage and applies a stage AoE when hit. A weak spot will open up on his right arm if this attack misses the player. Upon doing enough damage to Grave Ward, he will open up for a damage phase. In Grave Ward's second phase, he will swap to Incendiary and shoot lasers from his eyes that will hurt the player and put a fire AoE on the stage. Upon being at or under half health, Grave Ward will now also shoot a massive laser beam from his chest which hits very hard and applies AoE damage. The closer you are to Grave Ward increases the damage the player takes. He will also slam on stage with corrosive damage and spew out corrosive puke that puts some grog on stage. Grave Ward is another example of good boss design as he implements another unique mechanic, that being a stage hazard. Grave Ward also gives cues when he will attack and what kind of attack he will throw. Also, his design is extremely unique, and so far the 2 vault monsters are the best designed boss fights thus far. It does not take much for a boss fight to be good, but simple things such as rewarding the player for picking up on patterns, adding unique mechanics, and having purpose are the best ways to do so. Grave Ward ticks all the marks and making the other 3.5 bosses of Eden look like jokes by comparison. Moving on to loot, we received 26 legendaries, 3 wards, and no graves. The ward is an amazing shield for Mara, at least the brawler variant. Grave is also good for Moze and Zane and can be used for many other builds. They are both worth looking into and worth the farm. Grave Ward is also a great giver of legendaries and purples, so it's good to stock up on gear from him. Next is the Agonizer 3000. Agonizer's arena is a perfect circle where tanks pour out of it, but the Agonizer uses the arena against the player. He has 2 phases, armored and unarmored. Agonizer lights sections of the floor on fire, keeping the player moving, and can put up walls to prevent the player's movement. He also flings a giant chainsaw out of his mouth and circles the arena. The player either has to jump or slide to avoid the saw. Agonizer will periodically shoot out 1 to 3 buzzsaws as well. He will also chop the Vault Hunter with his giant knife. At times, he will also pull out a nail board that is very hard to avoid and does massive damage, but the player can slide jump to time and avoid it. Upon almost stripping his armor, the Agonizer retreats to an immune stage. He will spawn ammo chests which will blow up and hurt the player if they get too close after a short amount of time. After stripping his armor, he will go immune again and lose his arms. He will then shoot a beam of Iridium out of his chest to damage the player, and it will track the player slowly. Agonizer can also shoot out Iridium balls when standing in front of him. While fighting Agonizer, there are red tanks over him that when shot will be counted as crit damage but will break after a certain amount of hits. During phase 2, shooting Agonizer in the chest will do massive damage. Agonizer is the most unique boss with many mechanics and attacks to keep the player guessing, but provide visual and audio cues to those paying attention. The Agonizer is designed to make the player feel confined and that they can't run. That no matter if they play aggressively or defensively, that the Agonizer is in control. That your only option is to try and survive and use your wits. This boss rewards players using the cues, and some attacks, while difficult to avoid, are not unfair nor impossible to do. It is designed to play mental games with the player, and it succeeds in that aspect. You can tell that time, effort, and an original idea with passion went into creating this fight. For loot, Agonizer gave us 28 legendaries. Agonizer at this time has no confirmed drop, but we'll see if Gearbox changed that in time. Agonizer now is a good source of legendaries and worth the farm. Troy is our next victim in our crusade to rid the galaxy of inconveniences. Troy's arena is in the shape of a diamond and offers no cover. There are also no ammo crates. If you walk into the water surrounding the arena, you will bounce on it, usually shooting right back to the stage. Troy's attacks consist of slamming down, shooting out Iridium orbs at the player. He also slashes at the player to create these. Troy will fly up in the air, slam down repeatedly, and send out shockwaves that knock up the player. He can also slash and send out 1 set of horizontal and vertical orbs. Troy occasionally will also shoot the occultist at the player. He will also dash forward and attack the player with his sword. Troy has immune phases which will be short, but after he takes further damage he will be going into another one. When this happens, he will put up 4 pillars in the corners of the arena that hold glowing orbs which the player will shoot. He will also drop a damaging orb in the middle of the arena that spawns tanks and shoots pillars of fire from the floor that hurt and knock up the player. Shooting the orbs on the pillars will make the one in the middle disappear. He will have 4 immune phases as well. When he gets under half health, he will hold his sword up in the air and summon a giant rock which he will try to crush the player with. This can be avoided by timing and sliding away from it. Also, when Troy goes immune for the 4th time, he will launch rocks at the player instead of pulling up the pillars. While Troy's health gets lower, his attacks seem to speed up, so please keep this in mind. Troy's boss fight is pretty well designed as it eliminates cover and rewards players for finding openings and dodging attacks. But up to this point, so have many other bosses, and in fact, Troy's fight is almost a copy of Katagawa's, which makes this one unbelievably dull. While Troy's attacks are interesting and a change of pace, at this point in the game, it is way too formulaic and simplistic to be one of the main villains. I can say that for myself, it is memorable, but it is still disappointing. The designers keep borrowing mechanics from previous fights in the game. At least Troy's second and fourth immune stages are new, but it doesn't save him from being too similar to many bosses that we've already faced. Sliding over to the loot, Troy has given 36 legendaries, 8 being occultists. The occultist works like the unkempt herald from Borderlands 2, being a torque pistol that splits when shot. However, unlike the herald, it shoots one slow-moving projectile with 3 circling around it. This gun is fairly strong. Now with Mayhem 4, Troy can drop a melee 1 shotgun known as Vosk's Death Grip, which fires beams at the weapon's element. It is definitely worth the farm, not just for those weapons, but for the fact that Troy drops legendaries fairly often. Next we have the most egregious offender for lazy boss design, which is General Traunt. His arena is exactly the same concept as his younger brother, a 3-lane arena with 2 high grounds. His attacks are exactly the same as Captain Traunt's, except they are now shock and corrosion. This is a copy-pasted boss fight. This is extremely insulting and lazy, and is even more ridiculous when seeing that Traunt 2 separates Troy and Tyreen. Yes, that is correct. This name-brand copy-paste is put smack dab in the middle of the 2 big bads of the game. What the fuck? Out of all the ideas you have to work with, out of all the possibilities for a boss fight on this mysterious planet, you really decide to make another Traunt as a main boss rather than a side mission one. I don't understand the thought process behind this or how anyone didn't come up with a better idea in the studio. This is pathetic, and it is blatantly reusing assets with some color swaps and slight changes. The only boss fight in the main story on a new planet is a reused asset, and that is completely unacceptable. I don't see any way to defend this. Even if someone says it was a foreshadowed joke, this is a horrible payoff, and it should have been a side mission if it was necessary. This is a waste of money, time, and effort, and it is embarrassing. For a game centered around looting and shooting with a focus on the bosses, this is pathetic. This is the opposite of everything a sequel should be. Gearbox should have worked hard to make new interesting bosses with new mechanics and fights, not this garbage that reuses assets, has artificial difficulty, and some are scaled up from normal enemies. 90% of bosses feel like Baby's first boss fight, do not offer anything interesting, nor do they add any new mechanics or change the formula. The bosses in the early game are supposed to be this way, to slowly get players to use these mechanics and to prepare for harder bosses. Yet that natural progression does not seem to happen at all. Most of the fights feel too easy or just uninteresting, and even in Mayhem 4 they become a joke. We'll get to Tyreen in a minute, but let's go over the loot for now. We received 14 legendaries and 3 being recursions, which is highly sought after for Amara. And as of the introduction of Mayhem 4, Traunt has been given a new weapon known as the Servo's Execute. It is an amazing weapon and definitely worth farming for, so good luck if you decide to do it. Finally, we have Tyreen the Destroyer, our final boss. Tyreen's arena mirrors that of Graveward, as it's on a cliffside, leaving the player vulnerable to being knocked off. To start on Tyreen's attack, she will shoot 3 rows of spikes out when she walks around the arena. She can puke iridium on the player, leaving an AoE on the arena, as well as drop iridium crystals that explode. Tyreen will toss out damaging wisps that can be avoided finding the right spots to stand in. She can also shoot an iridium beam out of her eye. Shooting the Destroyer will make her kneel, which the player can then climb onto her back and shoot the eye above her head. She'll be immune to all damage for a period of time, minus shooting the eye. However, she will stand up after a bit and fly off the arena. She will create a giant fire orb that splits off into beams and rotates. This can be avoided by sliding towards the front of the arena. She will then come back to the arena again. This will repeat, and on the second time she will summon 2 fire orbs that will shoot 4 beams at once. At the same time, she will send 5 giant wisps at the player. Both do massive damage. This cycle will continue until Tyreen hits low health. When she does, she will fly up and fly left, right, then landing back on the stage. During this, she will send out 12 damaging beams from her wings that cover most of the arena. She will also shoot out more of the iridium crystals that explode. During the entire fight, Varkids and Nox drones will come out. This is about all for her fight, but she has a great design, even if to me she felt way too easy to be a final boss. Her concept is more about stage control, which has been prevalent throughout the entirety of the game. She also adds a new use for the vaulting mechanic, having to climb on her at points to do damage, which was a nice addition. Her having truly unique attacks during her immune phases, to me, makes her feel much more unique than most of the bosses previously mentioned. Compared to the last few bosses and the ones on Eden 6, she is a massive improvement over them. Overall, her design is decent with attacks that require some memorization, and she offers at least one new use for a mechanic added into the game. Loot-wise, Tyreen has dropped 36 legendaries, 6 of which being her bitch SMG and 5 of which being the King Queen's Call. The bitch is a decent SMG that is super accurate and is overall average at best. On the other hand, the King and Queen's Call are very strong even with nerfs, as they can provide infinite ammo and multiple critical hits. This weapon is amazing with flak and Moes, but other builds can make use of it as well. I'm sure the one thing you've noticed, though, throughout this whole section is my issues with boss design. The reason I waited until the end here is that if I had done it as I went through every boss, this section would be 2 hours long, so I will combine it all here. So Captain Trant, Katagawa Ball, Warden Billy, Genevieve, and General Trant are all base enemies scaled up. We're excluding Shiv from this since he is the first boss the player fights, and that's okay. It's okay that he's simple since up to that point he'll be the first badass that the players will come across. However, this late in the game, scaled up enemies shouldn't be here as bosses. On a surface level, one can say that it's not a big deal as it's only 5 bosses, but what makes it a problem is that it is 5 out of 16 bosses that are reused assets or scaled up base enemies, which means that 1/3 of the bosses are uninspired and had little to no thought put into them. This is a particular problem for a franchise that revolves around farming bosses. It is uninteresting to have to come back to farm reused assets once, but when you're 50 runs in, you will get bored of looking at that larger than average Goliath that you've been killing for the last hour and a half. This is a major problem when we are 4 games into this franchise. It comes off as boring, uninspired, and lazy, and it's a disappointment to those hoping for a bit more originality. Let's hope the Godfall does not suffer the same syndrome.
A store.
It should have been.
Look at all this floor space.
So
You
much,
do aerobics in here.
so many activities.
Do step class.
It's making my head spin. How many activities we can do?
Play Army Man.
Yeah.
Another new part of the Borderlands franchise to be added are collectibles in the form of towers, logs, ruins, claptraps, hunts, and assassinations. The radios are reminiscent of the towers from the Far Cry series, and some of the channels can provide a little bit of lore to them, such as the whereabouts of Dr. Zed or others. It adds more content to the game and more things to do across multiple characters. The Typhon logs perform a similar function to the towers, except they provide backstory for Typhon and it adds to the lore in other ways, such as explaining Atlas in the Vault and the backstory of Athenas with Siren Queen Dido. The inclusion of little things like this that add backstory along with our usual Echo logs is a great step forward for the franchise as a whole. Though with the Echo logs themselves, it would have been nice to get some that really fill in the gaps with the B-Team, with Lilith, and more on Maya. We also could have used Echoes hinting to the whereabouts of the past Vault Hunters, as there is no reference to them in the Takedown or the new DLC. We also get backstory and lore on the Iridians, which I will cover in the section after this one. The Siren Nereid describes the events leading up to the collapse of the Iridian Empire. It is all very interesting and answers a lot of questions that longtime fans have had since Borderlands 1. We also get to find dead claptraps and strip parts off of them. This gives us more claptrap dialogue, and the culmination of all the parts leads to Claptrap having a new friend. You also get a free legendary out of it, so it may be worth doing depending on how you feel about the Baby Maker. The last 2 additions are hunts and assassinations. They pretty much are a canon way to add mini-bosses to the game, and some of them are very interesting. The reward for completing both is a legendary weapon. For completing all hunts, Hammerlock will give the Becca. For all assassinations, Zero will give you the Lyuda. The Lyuda is definitely worth it, though the Becca is up to personal preference. The addition of more little stuff to do, as well as having a percentage and a menu to keep track of the challenges, is welcomed. It adds more to the longevity of the game and more to do for completionists, which is never a bad idea. All the mini-bosses are the usual reference and give legendaries depending on who you farm. I may be making a video on those, showcasing each weapon in detail and going over how good they are, but only time will tell. I think that about wraps it up for the little stuff, but the design team did a great job on it.
Get on with it.
Yes, get on with it.
Oh, I am enjoying this scene.
Get on with it.
Finally, for the playable content in Borderlands 3, we have the side missions. I will be going over some of the gems in this and briefly covering them while trying not to spoil anything, and I will be going in order by planet. Let's start with the first one called Powerful Connections. The gist of it is that Marcus's machine is broken and you have to fix it. There is an open current, and you need a shock skag spine to close it so the machines will have power. This not only introduces new players to random badasses, but also sets up for how the gun machines work. Doing the extra objective opens up red chests for the player, which again helps to establish new mechanics. Next we have the Dump on Dump Truck and Bad Reception, both of which shows a new player how to use their environment to find loot and how to use their environment to their advantage. Life of the Party is another good mission. It's more late game, but its premise is enjoyable. You go to a birthday party, do some menial tasks, which is also impacted by the morality of it. Now what do I mean by that? Well, you're trying to beat the records of a little girl by eating more cake than her, shooting more rack than her, and chucking more grenades through a hoop. Except she's been dead for a while and was Mordecai's prodigy. Couple that with a grieving father and Mordecai, and it turns this mission into a moral quandary. Do I disrespect this dead girl's memory for loot, or do I respect her memory by letting her record stand? The last side mission on Pandora that is worth noting is Childhood's End, which goes over Jack and Angel's backstory concerning his wife. I won't say anything past that, but I do recommend that everyone go to Comrade's Hold and do that mission. On Promethea, I would suggest doing the Kill Kilovolt, where you hunt down batteries and kill badasses for their offerings. This unlocks Lecture City. We then go fight and kill Kilovolt. In my opinion, that is the only one that's worth a mention. On Eden 6, most of the side missions are forgettable, and the only one that I'd recommend doing would be the Bloodpath. You help a convict named Ramsden find his friend Holder. This is more subjective as I don't find Eden 6 to be enjoyable, but hey, that's just me. Lastly, on Necro de Feo, I would do all the missions here. To me, they're a lot of fun, and they show off the personalities of Sparrow and Grouse with some emotional payoff at the end. The last three things I want to address are the Circles of Slaughter, Trials, and Maliwan Takedown. These are endgame activities and are actually all decently well made. It's actually kind of impressive and I recommend everyone try these out. The Circle of Slaughter is a horde mode that can now give you unique legendaries depending on the location. You have to survive 5 waves of enemies. Not much has changed since its debut. The Trials are similar to this, except you're progressing through an area to get to a mini-boss. It functions quite the same as a Strike in Destiny. They also give some lore on the Guardians and the Iridians, which is nice as well. Finally, the new Maliwan Takedown is like a mini-raid. It is challenging and will push players to master their builds. It's kind of like They Destruct Peak from Borderlands 2 in a way. That would be the best way to describe it. Wotan's an interesting fight, and the raid is a well put together piece of content. I will actually be doing a separate video on the takedown itself as I feel there's a lot to cover in it. In total, there are about 60 side missions and not counting all the bounties, but I do implore everyone to do them all at least one time to get their own impressions of the content. The gameplay has had a lot of overall improvements with a high focus on improving mobility of the player character and quality of life changes. Gearbox chose to make the player movement more fluid, leading to areas in which, in theory, this fluidity could be used greatly. This, however, was very limited, and our new mobility is rarely used in unique ways for quests. What is unique about mobility is that artifacts can now add effects to them. Whether it would be shooting out buzzsaws when sliding or generating an AoE upon a slam, they at least add some flair to the artifacts. Class mods being given a capstone increase as well as non-requirement for being spec'd into the boost skills to take advantage of the class mod was a great idea. This leads to the player having more freedom to experiment with skill points by saving what the class mod already offers. Item generation has also been improved by adding more variety to them, as well as adding the bonus anointments that can turn decent pieces of gear into good options. Slag being removed was not a great idea, as having an element that could deal double damage output would have been very useful for Mayhem mode. This again could have been working to character elements and whatnot, but that's a topic for another day. Adding radiation was not a bad idea, but it is only useful for mobbing as per its unique effect. Gearbox missed an opportunity to add back missing weapons. Whether this was ever considered is unknown, but it is disappointing. They also opted to remove more, such as Hyperion pistols, Maliwan launchers. Skill trees have been greatly improved upon by adding more build variety and player options for specific builds. A pet class is no longer locked to only having one pet skill and can now use 2 other unique abilities. Augments also add more variety and build potential, and this rework of the skill trees is immensely impressive. It has RPG elements which are highly welcomed. The bosses are overall a disappointment, and while Gearbox tried to do something new with them, it was executed poorly. The effort, however, will be noted, and I myself hope that Gearbox will continue to improve upon this. The little collectibles offer up more challenges for those aiming for 100%. This also adds goals for players who want an easy Lyuda or Becca for themselves. The side missions were mostly underwhelming and, in my opinion, extremely forgettable and disappointing. We got some variety, but not enough of it was good. The game definitely could have benefited from quality missions rather than quantity. On the other hand, the Circles of Slaughter, Trials, and Takedown are all well-made pieces of endgame content that can be enjoyed. So that wraps up our summary for this portion of Borderlands 3. I'll be talking about some customization, planet design, enemy design, and lore in the next section of the critique. After that will be the Maliwan Takedown and Handsome Jack DLC parts of the series. The series by the end of it will probably have 6 or 7 parts. However, this is just a roadmap for the future. The next video I'm working on will be a rebuttal to Caption's video called Borderlands 3 Review, It Sucks. I know it's kind of ironic that I'm picking apart a video called Borderlands 3 It Sucks while I'm making this series, but it is very poorly written and I want you guys to see this. You need to. If you guys want to keep up with me, I do have a Twitter at arcana_tex, where I post some updates on the content I'm working on. If you guys have anything that I missed or that I need to work on, please leave it in the comments section down below, and consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, as there will be more like it. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
I wonder what will happen. I wonder what will happen.
However, in turn, the offensive nature of Rampager's first form will make purely offensive players a no-go, making more offensive— What? He will jump and slam the player similar to Tron, as well as he will also smack the player, leaving them with a dot. He will jump and slam the player similarly to Trant as well, except he will jump from one of the side arenas. He will jump and slam the player similarly He will jump and slam the player similarly to Trant as well, except he will jump from one side of the arena to the other, or climb up to the pedestals in the corner and suplex off of them. Rampager can slam. His most powerful attack is Fucker. There are also 2 doors open. There are also 2 doors up top and bottom that add spawn to. The mini bosses I will be addressing in entirely in. The mini bosses I will be addressing in a different. Santa's coming tonight. Santa's coming tonight. Ah, Thanos car. Wow, old meme. Yes. It's fucking beautiful. I love this. I love this shit. Fucking hype. Ah, there we go. Okay. The trials are similar to this, except you are progressing through an area to get to the end of a fight to fight a mini-boss. That's not right. The trials are similar to this, except you are progressing through an area to get to the end of a fight. Oh my god. The trials are similar to this, except you're progressing through an area to get to fight a mini-boss.